Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first day of Who Do You Think You Are, and to the DNA workshop area. My name is Maurice Leeson, and I'll be facilitating the this workshop over the course of the next 3 days. And it's a great pleasure to be here and to introduce the DNA workshop. This is a workshop that has been sponsored by Family Tree DNA, who have their stand just over here. So if you're interested in having a DNA test done, then please make your way over to the stand. The lecture series has been organized by ISOG, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, and they have a stand just over there as well. So it's free to join the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. It's a great resource. They have a fantastic Wikipedia page, Wikipedia website, which is largely catered for by Debbie herself. And that has tons of information about DNA testing, what it means, and what you can get from it. And we'll be hearing a lot about this over the course of the next 3 days as well. And to start off, we have Debbie Kennett. Now, Debbie is going to talk to us about DNA for beginners. And Debbie has been involved in the world of DNA testing since 2007. And is now one of the UK's leading genetic genealogy experts. She's the author of 2 books for the History Press. The first one was published in 2011 and is called DNA and Social Networking. Are they available at the
History Press stand?
Oh, at the ISOG stand?
It's my
the History Press stand. Great.
Why not working here?
You just need to put it off mute. I'll
It's off mute.
That's fine. Yeah, it should be working now. Drop it.
Okay, that's it.
And Debbie's second book is the Surnames Handbook, which was published in 2012. Debbie's also the writer of the popular Cruwys News blog, and that features articles on her Cruwys one name study, but also on genetic genealogy in general, especially from a British point of view. So it's a very, very useful blog. You should check it out. Debbie was recently appointed as Honorary Research Associate in the Department of Genetics, Evolution and Environment at University College London in July 2013. And she's a member of the Guild of One Name Studies and the Society of Genealogists. So to talk to us about DNA for beginners, could I ask you all to give Debbie a warm welcome? Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me, first of all, at the back? Okay. Oops, sorry about my naughty antivirus that suddenly popped up here. Let's just get rid of that. Right, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to just go through some of the basics of DNA testing this morning and just explain what the 3 basic tests are and how they work, so that hopefully, if you're thinking of taking a test, you'll have a good understanding of what the test is going to do and which test is going to work for your particular situation. The 3 tests that we're going to be looking at, the first test is the Y-chromosome DNA test. And this test is one which follows the paternal line. So that's normally the surname line, but not always. The second test is the mitochondrial DNA test, which tracks the maternal line. That's your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother's mother, and so on back in time. And the third test is an autosomal DNA test. And this can be used to give you matches with your genetic cousins on all your family lines. But before I start on the test, I just want to go through a few things that apply to all types of DNA testing, whichever test you take. The first point to make is that a DNA test is just another type of record that you use as part of your family history research. And as with any type of paper record, you don't just use one piece of evidence on its own, you use all the records in combination. So just think of the DNA as just another record that you can add to your collection to help you to come to conclusions about your research. We can use DNA testing to explore surnames, that's particularly the Y-chromosome test. It can provide insights into surname evolution and surname origins. It can help us to verify our family trees. It can confirm or disprove relationships. And sometimes it can actually bridge gaps in the paper records. You can get DNA matches even though you don't have a paper record. So you have a connection where you wouldn't actually be able to find it with your traditional research. And it's very useful for helping with brick walls. There are a lot of adoptees who are now using DNA testing, and some of them are having great success actually finding their living relatives in the databases which are growing by the day. And if you have an illegitimate line, sometimes it can provide clues to help you break through that brick wall. It can sometimes give you a geographical focus for your research. If you get a match with someone who's done all the research already, and then you can sometimes link in with their research, so you can focus on a particular county rather than having to focus on, say, the whole country. And it just gives you a connection with your genetic cousins from all over the world. It's very special having that genetic link with someone, just actually seeing the evidence of that in the DNA record. And the mitochondrial DNA and Y-DNA can give you an insight into your deep ancestry, going back for thousands of years. DNA testing does not replace documentary research. You can't use the DNA record on its own. You still have to go back and do the paper research. And it doesn't give you the names of your ancestors. Unlike a paper record, it's not going to tell you that your ancestor was a particular person who lived at a particular time. It doesn't give you very precise relationships. It's done on probabilities, so you get like a sort of range of dates and a range of possible relationships, and then you have to go back to your paper trail and try and establish the relationship. And again, it doesn't provide the precise dates. Sometimes it can be quite a wide date range which you get a match. One word of warning: if you are afraid of skeletons, stay out of closets. This applies just as much to family history research as it does to taking a DNA test. And sometimes when you start digging, you find something unexpected. And people do take DNA tests, and they do sometimes have unwelcome findings. People find unknown relatives in the database, and it all depends on your perspective. You're finding an unknown half-sibling might be a pleasant surprise, but for someone else it might be a big embarrassment. But those sort of things happen, so be prepared, as with any type of research. And the other question that keeps coming up is people are always wanting to find out if they can use DNA from deceased relatives. And I'm afraid the answer in most cases is no. It's actually you can't get permission to start digging up coffins out of graveyards. Even if you could, the DNA gets very degraded. So the very important point to make about a DNA test is you have to test people while they are still around to be tested. So it's one record where you have to get now while you have the chance. You can't suddenly turn around in 10 years' time and say, oh, I wish we'd got grandpa's DNA, I wish we'd got mum's DNA. You have to do it now while you get the chance. Only in very rare situations when you have kings buried in car parks and a whole university team, you actually have the chance to investigate DNA from historical people. And one of the nice features about family tree DNA is they do allow you to nominate a beneficiary. So if you take a DNA test, I recommend everyone fills out this form so that other people can then have access to your DNA record in the future, because DNA is something that just keeps on working for you. Even if you don't get results immediately, in 10, 20 years' time, someone else will come along and will still be able to use that record so long as you've given them access to it. So now I'm going to move on to the first test, which is the Y-chromosome DNA test, which follows the paternal line, the surname line. And just a quick biology lesson: if you're a female, you have 2 X chromosomes. If you're a male, you have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is a very tiny computer thing here, but it doesn't make any difference. Size doesn't matter, as I say. But as only males have the Y chromosome, you have to have a male to take this particular test. But if you're a female, you can recruit your male relatives to take a test, and there are lots and lots of females in the DNA world actively recruiting all their male relatives, and it's often the females who are running all the surname projects. you sometimes find you have to offer a few entitlements to get people to do the test. Now, with the Y-chromosome test, the results are best coordinated within a surname project, because what you're trying to do is find matches with other people with your surname, so you get the best success when the results are coordinated within a structured surname project. Within a project, it helps you to verify family trees. You can look at the origin of the surname. You can try and investigate whether a surname has a single origin, whether it has multiple origins. And you can also look at which surname variants are related. You often get lots of different related spellings of surnames, so you're not sure if they're all part and parcel of the same tree. And this test also is a deep ancestry test, taking you way back in time to your pre-surname history, going back for thousands of years. Just to show you a reminder of the path we inherited, so the Y-chromosome test is just this top line of your family tree. It's just one very specific line, but it follows that line way, way back in time. Now, how does the test work? Well, the Y-chromosome is passed on from father to son, and it's passed on virtually unchanged. But every now and then you get little errors occurring in the sort of copying process, which are known as mutations. And the test itself targets particular locations on the Y-chromosome where these mutations are known to occur. They have there's a scientific name, they're called short tandem repeats, STRs. You don't really have to worry about the technical terms, but that's one of the key ones that you probably keep coming across. And then for each marker you get a number. And then it's rather like a big number matching game. All the numbers go into a database, you don't have to worry about what the numbers mean. It's whether your numbers match with other people who are in the database. So if you were to take a DNA test, a Y-DNA test, this is what you get, this string of numbers, and this is called your haplotype. But those numbers, on their own, they don't really tell you very much at all. It's really pretty meaningless. So the whole value of a DNA test is in the comparison process, and this is where testing with a company like Family Tree DNA really helps, because they have this massive database, the largest Y-chromosome database in the world, with over 500,000 Y-chromosome DNA results. So most people now, they do tend to get a match in the database of some sort or another. And the more the test works, the more matching markers you have, the closer the relationship. And then if you have too many matches, then you do not share a common ancestor within what we call the genealogical time frame, or roughly within the formation of surnames. This is what happens when you compare two DNA results. In this case, I know the tree, and I've tested two people who are both descended from this one person in Devon. I've got tested someone descended from one son, someone tested from another son, and you can see the results, every single number matches, and this is what we call an exact match. So that, in this case, the DNA test has confirmed the relationship, so we know that both of those lines have been true, and there's been no infidelities in the line. And if you add another result, in this case you can see here one number is different. So in one of these lines there's been a mutation, but it's still, all the other numbers match, so that's still within the limits of what we might expect. And then another result here is added, and you can see how in this case it's subdividing this little matching group into two distinct branches. So we've got this one mutation that identifies one branch, and another, and then the other people in the other branch have a different number on that marker. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes it can be useful when you get one of these branch identifying markers, and you can actually tell from the DNA record which particular branch of the tree someone belongs to. And one other result came in. This is again all people with the same surname, and you can see this time the numbers are all completely different. It's only about 3-4 numbers that match. So in this case, even though it's the same surname, we know that they do not share a common ancestor on the direct maternal line. And when you buy a DNA test, you can buy different numbers of markers. When the tests first were introduced in the year 2000, it was really expensive. You could only ever buy a 12-marker test. The prices have been plummeting in recent years. You can now start off, if you want to, with a test of just 12 markers for £35. What you do find if you test with 12 markers is sometimes people can have large numbers of matches, and it's very difficult to tell from only 12 markers whether the match is meaningful. So the test that most people start with is the 37 marker test, which is on a special offer at the show. It's now £85, I believe. And that's normally very good for finding matches. If you have a match with someone with the same surname as you, then you can be reasonably confident that the match is good. You can order extra markers if you want to. You can have a 67 marker test, and you can even go up to 111 marker tests. Those are really for more specific situations. If you're illegitimate and you're trying to find a match with another surname, it's usually best to test 67 markers. And you do get some people, particularly Irish people, can sometimes have huge numbers of matches. There seems to be one particular Irish line where it's been very, very prolific, which results in large numbers of people all having matches. So in that case, those people have to go up to 111 markers. But that's a rare situation. It's only like 1 to 2% of the people who take the test are affected in that way. When your results come through, you get a personal page on the Family Tree DNA website, and you get all sorts of features on there. And this is where you look at your matches. This is actually my dad's page, and these are his matches at 37 markers. And I've actually blanked out the names, but you actually get the full name of the people you match with, and you can contact them by email. And if you're lucky, they provide you the details of their most distant ancestor. So here you can see my dad's got matches with other people with his surname, which is Cruwys, but he's also got matches with a few other people with different surnames. And that is quite common because obviously the names have not remained. Surnames sometimes get passed on, not through the direct male line, sometimes through the female line. So you will always find a few matches with other surnames. Now the matching thresholds, these are the criteria that Family Tree DNA use. You're allowed just 1 or 2 mismatches at each level. It's only the 12 marker matches that so you have to have an exact match. And the number of matches you get varies considerably. There are some people, I've got a few in my project, who will take a test and they don't have any matches at all at any level. That is becoming quite rare now, but it does happen to very, very occasionally. At the other extreme, if you're one of these, the Irish signature, which is actually a Nile of 9 hostages signature, if you happen to match that, you can have literally thousands of matches. And these are actually the most extreme numbers of matches, but most people will fall probably globally like a couple of perhaps 10 or 12 matches at 37 markers. It varies considerably. It's one of these things you just do not know until you've tested. It's all worked out on probabilities. Family Tree DNA gives you a nice little tool called a tip tool where you can compare the results. And this just shows you 2 comparisons, one at 36 markers, 37 markers, one at 67 markers. So it gives you a probability that 2 people share a common ancestor within a given number of generations. So a 36 out of 37 marker match, it's a very, very high probability that those 2 people share a common ancestor within the last 24 generations. And you can see it could actually occur anywhere in between that range. And you just never know. Sometimes a father and son can take a test and they will mismatch on, say, 1 marker, and then I've got people who tested on 67 markers who all share a common ancestor back in the 1700s, and they don't have a single difference between them. So there's a very, very wide range of the possibilities. The results from the Y-chromosome test are normally organised within a surname project. This is the results page of my own Cruwys DNA project. And you can see I've grouped people into what we call genetic families. So I've got each group here, all the people in that group, they have genetic matches with each other. So that's regardless of whether the paper trail shows that they match. And you can see that they're from the most distant known ancestor information. Some of them come from all over the place. Some people, I've got people in America who don't know where in England they originate. I've got Canadians, I've got someone from Cornwall, someone from Ireland, and we've even got someone with a different surname here. This is call them one of the non-paternity events where the result does not match as expected. The other name we call it is not the parent expected. That's the other way to remember the acronym. In this case, the Rainey, when we looked at the records, he was actually living, his ancestor was living in an area where there were lots of Cruwys, and we rather suspect that something had been going on there. It wasn't revealed in the records. The other part of the Y-chromosome test is the haplogroup assignment you'll be given. Actually, just go back to this page. Can you see here that all these mysterious letters here? That is the haplogroup. This is an indication of your deep ancestry. There are lots of different haplogroups. They all have letters going through from A through to T. And each haplogroup has its own particular geographical location. So you'll find haplogroups A and B are found in Africa. You'll find Native Americans have a particular branch of haplogroup Q. In India there's haplogroup H. And then there are various haplogroups that you'll find in Europe. These are the main haplogroups that you'll find in England. About 70% of men in England will belong to haplogroup R1b. If you are interested in deep ancestry, you can go on and order extra tests, which are called SNP tests, which will give you your precise branching within the R1b tree. That's a specialist subject that will be covered by some of the other talks later on. But these are the main ones you find. Sometimes you do get surprises thrown up. There have been a few people who've been haplogroup A who have discovered in Yorkshire. If you're something like, say, haplogroup H, that's from India, that might indicate that you've got gypsy ancestors. And the DNA does sometimes throw up a few surprises like that. So the next test we're going to look at is the mitochondrial DNA test, and this is the one that follows the maternal line. The mitochondrial DNA is passed on by a mother to both her male and female children. So in this case, both males and females can take the test. So it traces your direct maternal line, so it's your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother's mother, and then it carries on that line going back in time. But this test is actually less useful as a genealogical tool because obviously when you're researching the maternal line, the surname keeps changing every generation, so you don't have the surname as a clue to help you with your matches. And also it has a much lower mutation rate. So it can confirm that two people are related, but it will be within a very wide time scale. But it's also very useful for deep ancestry. And you'll find also that mitochondrial DNA, whenever you see anything in the newspapers about historical people having their DNA tested, it's usually mitochondrial DNA that has been tested because there's an awful lot of mitochondrial DNA in each cell, and it's normally the mitochondrial DNA that survives, even if there's no other DNA that has survived. And this is just to remind you of the inheritance part. So it's just this one very specific line, the bottom line of your tree. So you've got these two tests, both following those two very specific lines, one on one side and one on the other side of your tree. None of the tests cover the lines in between. If you want to test someone from one of those other lines, then you have to find the right person, go up the tree and then back down the tree to get the person to do the test for you. There are two different resolutions for the mitochondrial DNA test. The basic test is now very, very cheap. When I first tested, I think I paid something like £120 to have just the HBR1 and HBR2 test done. Just to show you, this is the mitochondrial DNA molecule here. So the mtDNA plus test tests this bit at the top here, which is called the control region, also known as the hypervariable region. That's why it's called HBR1, HBR2. And that's the bit where most of the mutations occur. And that's the reason why that region is selected when the test is first introduced. Now we have the ability to have our full mitochondrial genome sequenced. This was really expensive even about 4 or 5 years ago. When the test was first introduced, it was about £500. I paid £700 when I had mine done. Now you can buy it here at the show for £100. That's the cost I paid, less than I paid to have the basic test done several years ago. Mitochondrial DNA results come through and they look like this, and you wonder what on earth has hit you. But you don't have to, again, you don't have to worry about any of these numbers. All this is telling you is your differences from the Cambridge reference sequence. But these numbers just go into the database, and it's again how many of your numbers match with other people, and as to whether or not you have a match, whether you have a relationship. And with mitochondrial DNA, we're really looking mostly for exact matches. Now, if you do just take the basic mtDNA plus test, it will give you matches within the database, but they will, in many cases, be quite distant. So you will be given a match, but you could share a common ancestor with that person from 700 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So that's not really so helpful for genealogy purposes. If you have the full sequence test done, this really brings down the date, and there's supposedly 99% probability of sharing a common ancestor within about 550 years. So it's still not that precise, but if you've got a particular scenario that you want to resolve on this specific line, then it can be very helpful. The mitochondrial DNA is also useful if you're interested in your deep ancestry, and again you'll get a haplogroup assignment. And just to confuse everyone, the mitochondrial DNA haplogroups do not correspond at all with the Y-DNA haplogroups, but they do again have specific geographical concentrations. So that can also give you clues to your ancestry. If you just take the basic test, you'll be told that you're a haplogroup H or a haplogroup T or a haplogroup X. If you take the full sequence test, you'll get lots of extra letters and numbers. So I'm a U4C1A. All those extra letters and numbers give you a lot more geographical resolution of your results. And these are the main haplogroups that you find in England. You'll see that, again, we've got a dominant haplogroup H, and almost 50% of people in England belong to this haplogroup H, and it's the same sort of figure across Europe. If you take the full sequence test, there are all sorts of subgroups of haplogroup H. I think we're up to H40, I think, or it may be higher now than that. And there was a very well-known book written by Professor Brian Sykes many years ago where he gave names to all the haplogroups, so you might sometimes come across these clan level names. But it really, what this indicates is that there were real people living many, many thousands of years ago who actually founded all these particular lineages. So the names we just personalise it. The best known practical application of DNA testing is the case of Richard III. I'm sure everyone's read all the press reports. But it was mitochondrial DNA that was used when there was a very dramatic press conference almost a year ago, and when they announced there was a DNA match, it was mitochondrial DNA that was used in this particular case. This is the tree, just a very brief outline. Richard III, being a male, he has mitochondrial DNA, he doesn't pass it on to his children. So to get the comparison with Richard III's mitochondrial DNA, they managed to trace a line from Richard's sister, Anne of York, and that line was traced down through her daughter, her daughter's daughter, right on through, I think it's like something like 14 generations, right down to the present day. A lady called Joy Ibsen had her DNA tested even before Richard III had been discovered, and we know from her testing she was a haplogroup called J1C2C. So if you're a J1C2C when you test, then you may be able to lay claim to a relationship with Richard III. But for the purposes of this investigation, Joy Ibsen had passed away, and Michael Ibsen, her son, was tested. So he has the DNA, but this is a good example of how DNA can, how important it is to test people while you can, because he is actually the last of his line. He doesn't have any, he can't pass it on to any children, and I believe he has a brother, and this particular line ends with this family. So if they haven't got the DNA tested now, they wouldn't have a chance. There is supposed to be a big scientific paper coming out on this in Nature. I understand Turi, the geneticist, has been writing it up, so you should see that coming out within the next, perhaps the next couple of months. The last test we're going to look at is the Autosomal DNA test, and this helps you to find matches with your cousins on all your family lines. Just a quick summary of the biology. We've seen that the Y-chromosome is one of the two sex chromosomes, and those two chromosomes, the Y-chromosome doesn't recombine. The thing with all of the autosomes is that each time we have a new baby created, each chromosome recombines, so you don't get that same linear effect that you get with the Y chromosome. You get this jumbled up effect that you can see here. And this just shows the inheritance process, just looking at one chromosome. So the chromosome you get from your mother is a mixture of the copy that she got from her father and from her mother. And so each time the mother contributes a copy, it's roughly a mixture of half of each of her two copies. So each child has a slightly different combination from the mother, and you can see that it's all inherited in blocks. And then as the generations progress, those blocks become progressively smaller and smaller. The test is suitable for both males and females because we all have autosomal DNA. And it tests a huge number of markers, 700,000 markers. And autosomal DNA is inherited from all your ancestors, so it gives you matches on all of your family lines. The limitation with this test is that it's much more difficult to use the further back in time you go. So it's much better for finding matches with cousins within the last 5 or 6 generations. And of course, the problem is when you have a match, it could be on any one of your lines. So you really need to make sure that you do the detailed genealogy research so that you can actually identify when you have a match with a fourth cousin, which line will match you on. And this test, again, the price has been plummeting. When this first came onto the market, it was about £200. It's now come down in price and it's only £60. It was £180 when it was first launched. And when you get your results in, this is my own matching page, and you're given a list of all the people that you match with. You're actually given their name. I haven't put the names on here. And you can contact them by email, and you're given the predicted relationship. And I've tested family members. You can see I've tested here my father, my mother, and luckily the relationship was predicted correctly. So I know that the process works. And also, you can see here I've got people who are predicted to be second to fourth cousins, third to fifth cousins, and I've got pages and pages of matches here. They can't give a precise prediction because there are so many variables in the way that DNA is inherited. So that's just a rough guideline. There's all sorts of complications if you have ancestors with, where there are lots of cousins married. That creates problems, and matches can appear closer than they actually are. You get a chromosome browser where you can compare results. This is a comparison between a grandfather and a granddaughter in one of my projects. And you can see on each chromosome how it's all inherited in segments. And it's quite a random process. So if you look at chromosome 7 there, for instance, in this particular case, they don't share any segments at all on that chromosome. And then on some of the other chromosomes, there are great big long blocks where they've inherited almost, they've got the entire chromosome in common. So it's a very, very random process, the way it's inherited. And this is one of my cousins matches with a predicted second to fourth cousin. You can see by the time we get out to this level, all that's left is just this one big block, or this chromosome 7 here, but that's enough to identify that there's a relationship. And in this case, when we went back to the family tree, we actually discovered that they were fourth cousins once removed. And in fact, he had some cousin marriages that actually made the relationship a little bit closer there. It's helpful to have an understanding of the statistics behind the inheritance process, so that you know what to expect from the process. So you get 50% of your DNA from your parents, 25% of your DNA you share in common with your grandparents, aunts, uncles, half-siblings. First cousins share 12.5% of their DNA in common. And then as we go back in time, the relationships get more distant, we only share tiny fractions of DNA. So once you start getting out to 6 cousins, sometimes you won't share any DNA at all with some of your 6 cousins, whereas you will share DNA with others. So it's just a very, very random process. There is a very useful page in the iSort Wiki which has got all these autosomal DNA statistics and lots of extra reading material there. So what this means is when you're taking a test, you need to consider what the chances of actually finding a match are. So if you test someone who's a second cousin, it's a 99% chance that they will show up as a match. I don't believe there has been a single documented case of second cousins testing who did not show up as a match. Third cousins, 90% of the time, they will show up as a match. But what this means is that 10% of third cousins who test, they will not actually have enough DNA in common to show up as a match with this test as it stands at the moment. So it doesn't mean that they are not third cousins, it just means that the test is not showing them up as a match. So this means you have to test extra people to confirm the relationship. Once you get like fourth cousins, only 50% of fourth cousins show up as a match, and only about 10% of fifth cousins. But because you have so many fourth, fifth, and sixth cousins and more distant cousins, what we'll find on the match list is you'll have far more matches for these distant cousins, and there's also all the intervening once removed, second removed relationships. So they will dominate the match list, and we'll have much fewer of the closer relationships. And the other part of this test will give you what's called a biogeographical analysis. This is called Population Finder. At the moment, this is rather primitive, and these are my results, and I'm just told that I'm European, which isn't really very helpful at all. This is most useful at the moment. It's very good at detecting differences between sort of Asians, Africans, and Europeans. So sometimes if people take this test, it can provide hints of different ancestry. So say if you have ancestors who are out in British India, you show up as Asian with a certain percentage of Asian, it could be a trace of an ancestor who was out in British India who married an Indian woman. And sometimes people get traces of African, but this test is supposed to be undergoing a revamp, and it will be greatly improved, but these tests are still not really very precise, so I wouldn't take the results too literally. So just treat that with caution. But if you are looking for something a little bit different, the Asian and the African, then that is a real signal. Just a quick word about family tree DNA. One of the important things that they have going for them is the size of their database. They have about 500,000 Y-DNA records in their database. It's the largest Y-DNA database in the world. And within the Guild of One Name Studies, all of our projects are hosted now at Family Tree DNA, so there's large numbers of British people in the database. You probably find more British people in the Family Tree DNA database than in any other database anywhere else. And they also have the largest mitochondrial DNA database, 167,000 or more mitochondrial DNA results. And they host all the surname projects. There are now getting on for 8,000 of those. And there are lots of geographical projects. I do a project in Devon. There are projects in various other counties. There's a British Isles project. And when you know your haplogroup, there are haplogroup projects. So when you take a test, it's very important to find the projects and join the projects. They're all projects run by volunteers, and if they all have varying amounts of time, but once you join the projects, the administrator should be able to help you with your results and help you to understand how it all works. And they also have a very wide range of tests. You can, if you want, if you're interested in the deep ancestry, you can order extra SNP testing. And they're the only company that offer the full mitochondrial DNA sequence test, the only company that do 111 marker test. And they benefit greatly from their partnership with the Genographic Project. This is a research project, and they're testing people from indigenous populations from all over the world. But also the public can participate in this. And people who tested the Genographic Project can transfer their results to family tree DNA. And this has brought in a really massive international participation in the family tree DNA database. One of my projects, I run a haplogroup project. I've got people joining from Finland, Russia, Poland, from all over the world. So it's really nice to have this international participation. Resources, everyone should have a copy of the handout. I've got a few more left if you didn't receive them, which I can give to you afterwards. The major resource is ISOC, International Society of Genetic Genealogy. There is an ISOC stand here where you can receive independent advice on DNA testing, so if you want to go and have a chat with the people over there, and I'll be helping over there as well. A number of books that you might like to read. The most recent book now, the one that I would recommend is Emily Adesino's book, Genetic Genealogy, The Basics and Beyond. And she's selling that book on the ISOC stand. If you're interested in deep ancestry, Jean Manco, who is doing a talk later on today, she's done a nice book called Ancestral Journeys, and she will be selling her book on the ISOC stand later on today as well. And I've written 2 books, one on surnames and one on DNA and social networking. Both of my books are on the History Press stand, which is over on stand number 944. So just to sum up, there are 3 different tests. We've talked about the Y-DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, and the Autosomal DNA tests. You need to choose a test that you want to take to fit the scenario that you want to do. DNA testing works best if you've got a particular situation that you want to resolve. You can't just take a test and go to a database and see what it turns up, but it works best if you've got a situation you want to investigate. But it's very important to test people while you still have the chance. So if you have got elderly relatives who want to get them tested, get them done now while you can, because you can't change your mind in 10 years' time. The prices have been plummeting. DNA testing is now affordable for everyone, with prices starting at £35. So if it's something you've been hesitating about doing, even if you don't want to pay the full amount, you can just easily pay £35 just for one of the basic tests to see how you get on. Sometimes it is a waiting game. Some people take the test, they don't get anything out of it in the short term, but it can sometimes be a long-term investment. But it does get very exciting when you do start getting matches and when you start making breakthroughs with your research. If you go fishing, you never know what you might catch. So I would encourage everyone to have a go. Okay, so I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Great, thanks very much, Debbie. Now I've got a microphone here, so we have about 10 minutes for questions. We can start over here in the second row.
Hi, Debbie. I'm currently taking the Geno2 test on Genographic, and I understand I can transfer into the family tree DNA. I don't know what the results are of that. Does that include a Y-DNA test, and how many markers does it?
The Genographic Project it gives you all, you've got Y-DNA SNPs, so that's not the STRs that will give you surname matches, that's deep ancestry. But you can transfer your Geno test to family tree DNA, join the haplogroup project, and then you have to order the STR test, like the 37 marker test, in order to participate in the matching database. You also get mitochondrial DNA. You get a very, very fine resolution with mitochondrial DNA. It's not worth taking a full sequence test if you've already got the Genographic test, unless you want to go into the matching database. It doesn't put you in the matching database. And you also get the Autosomal DNA analysis. That's the biogeographical analysis, so it's your percentages of European, Asian, Mediterranean. Then you get the antigen and Denisovin analysis.
Yeah, I also did the 23andMe test, so I've got a lot of that data already. But to summarise, I should probably take at least take a test here with family tree DNA, so that my DNA is with them, and then I can in future upgrade my Y-DNA.
Yes, that's right. If you do, say, an STR test, and then when your genographic results come through, you can transfer your Geno2 results to your family tree DNA account, and then that can be used by the haplogroup project. With the Geno2 results, there are people actually collecting those results, lots of citizen scientists working with the data, so you can actually share your results with those people, and they will help you to understand what they need.
Okay, thanks. Question over here in the first row.
Why don't we test in the UK? Why don't we do the testing? Why do you have to send it to the States?
Well, there are companies that do the tests in the UK, but the problem is DNA does not stay in one country. It's international. We all have relatives who emigrate to Australia, Canada, and the like. It just seems just the way it's worked out. The largest company happened to be American. Family Tree DNA did actually buy out a British company. There was a British company called DNA Heritage, but they didn't manage to survive on their own. So Family Tree DNA took over their database. So all those results of DNA Heritage have been transferred. There is a British company called Recombination DNA, but they only do very deep ancestry tests. But it doesn't really matter where you send your DNA. The database is the important part.
Work in terms of accuracy, in terms of privacy, how does it work with you? How do they keep?
They're very, very strict on privacy. You have to sign a release form to allow your results to go into the matching database. And then for all the matches that you see, you've actually got a lot of controls in your account. If you don't want to receive those matches, you can switch them all off, you can switch them off at different levels.
And if there's someone you didn't want to see your results, could you block someone?
You can't block individuals, you can block results at specific levels. So if you didn't want to see 12 marker matches, you can block those. You can, if you want, just confine your matches to your project. So if you join, say, a surname project, you can just confine your matches to the surname project rather than the wider database. And there are various, I think it's something called the Safe Harbour Agreement that Family Tree DNA has signed up to. They are very, very tight on privacy. As admins, if we want to try and get information about people, we can't. They have to write on our behalf and ask them to join our projects. So they're very, very strict about that.
Decide if they wanted your results and get them.
No, well, also those results wouldn't mean anything to anyone anyway, because the forensic type test is a completely different type of DNA test. They use autosomal STR markers, and those aren't tested with any of these genealogy tests.
Any other questions? Yes, we have one here. We'll be coming down to it. There we go.
Could you tell me what haplogroup B is?
I'm sorry?
Haplogroup B.
Haplogroup B, are you talking about mitochondrial DNA or Y-DNA?
I'm not sure.
Is it your test?
It's my brother's.
Your brother's? We need to know whether it's Y-DNA or mitochondrial DNA. It's whatever it is, if he's an English person, it's haplogroup B, it's unusual.
That's what they said.
Yes, so that would be very interesting. Make sure he joins the project, the haplogroup B, for whichever, whether it's mitochondrial DNA or Y-DNA. I presume it's probably Y-DNA, but if it's Y-DNA, haplogroup B is one of the African haplogroups. So that's quite rare, quite unusual, so well worth investigating. If it was haplogroup B mitochondrial DNA, that's normally Native American or Asian.
If it's haplogroup B, from an English perspective, it might go back to African slaves who were brought over by the Roman soldiers.
Yeah.
Another question here in the front row.
Okay, if I have a 67 marker, I'm quoting here, okay, STRY DNA test.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it the what information will I get back? I mean, will it be so technical, or will I then have to have it translated by someone? Especially if it's in relation to a name project.
Well, if you're in a project, as long as the administrator is available to help you, you'll get help from the administrator. There are all sorts of features on the page. It's up to you how you want to use the information that's on the page. But the main thing is the matching database. That's the thing you have to focus on. You go and look at your matches, and then it's just contacting your matches.
The reason why I say that is that we've been asked by the name project to have that done to be used as a standard, because we can go right back.
Right.
So I wanted to know, what's going to happen? Well, I just get a load of barcodes back, and there you go.
No, you get an account on the Family Tree DNA website. You log into your account, and then you can see all the details in your account. You'll be able to log in and look at your matches. You'll be able to
Is that
see
backward matches in history?
Sorry?
Is it backwards in history or current?
No, it's people who match you purely based on the DNA. The 67 markers you're given matches with people who match you on up to 60 out of 67 of those markers. That's the threshold. So you're just given a list of names of people who you match with, and you're given, in fact, I'll show you the match here. Oops.
We should have come earlier, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'll show you the matching page here. Right, okay, so this is what you would get. You log in on the website, and this is your account. There's all sorts of, it takes some time to work your way through all this. This is the match page, so you can see here, this is my dad, and he gets the names of his matches. I haven't put the full names there, I've blocked them out here for privacy. You get the most distant known ancestor of all the people you match with. You can see here that's the number of steps difference. So that's how many markers difference there are.
So most distant known ancestor?
It's done on most distant known ancestor, yes. Not everyone provides that information. Some people do, some people don't. And also you can contact people in the system by email. Not everyone responds. Some people have been in the database for 14 years or more. Some people have passed on and no longer respond. But there's a massive stuff in there to explore.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Well, thanks very much, Debbie. That's the. We have to call it quits to the questions at that stage, but hopefully you have a much better idea now of the 3 types of DNA tests and what they can all, when each of those types can do for you. So can I just ask you one last time to give you, show your appreciation for Debbie Kennett. Thanks very much.